Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Mail and Guardian's webinar in partnership with the Southern African Alcohol Policy Alliance of South Africa. My name is Pontsho Pilane, and I'll be your facilitator for this afternoon, for this morning and into the afternoon as we discuss this very important topic. But before we start, I'd like to introduce my esteemed panel of speakers who will be discussing and breaking down the importance of keeping alcohol out of schools in South Africa. First, we have our first speaker, Professor Neo Morojele, who is the Deputy Director of Alcohol and Tobacco Unit at the South African Medical Research Council. We're also joined by Shaheda Omar, who's the Clinical Director at the Teddy Bear Clinic for Abused Children. And we also have Jane Borman, who's a Parliamentary Researcher for Ecoeducation. And last but not least, we also have Reverend Tsepo Matubatuba, who is a community activist and has been involved in this issue. Before we even begin speaking to our speakers, I'd like to encourage all our audience to please interact with us and put questions in our Q&A section and engage us also in our chat section. Please be also advised that at different intervals, we will be prompting you with questions to ask certain things that are regarding this, the discussion that we're about to have around alcohol in schools. And last but not least, it is very important for us to really engage with the stakeholders and various stakeholders around the issues and their thoughts on this as we embark on talking about this. But to contextualize where we are at the moment, if we look at the historical or contextualize the history of the work that SAAPA has been doing over the past few years, the Control of Marketing of Alcoholic Beverages Bill of 2013 has not been passed. The Road Traffic Amendment Bill of 2015 still hasn't been passed, and the Liquor Amendment Bill of 2016 has not been passed as well. And we just come on the back foot of Child Protection Week, which ended, and it has come and gone. But we are now also in Youth Month, which is an important time to think about the conditions in which young people in South Africa live in. And beyond that, right now, we know that the Basic Education Bill is being tabled in Parliament with comments open for until the 15th of June this year, which is next week. And this recommendation, one of the recommendations in the Bella Bill is that liquor should be allowed on school premises during school functions or and on and off school premises for the purposes of fundraising. But this is an issue for concern for the myriad of organizations that make up SAAPA South Africa, who have been fighting and really advocating for young people to be protected from the temptations of alcohol or the easily accessed availability of alcohol in South Africa, particularly when we're looking at the scourge of gender-based violence, when we're looking at risky sexual behavior that is often motivated or increased when young people or anyone has been drinking. In that context of young people, where we find South Africa, its social and economic status and where society is, SAAPA SA is saying that this should not be allowed. And liquor clauses in the Bella Act are evidence of failure of government to protect young people, particularly as we come out of Child Protection Week. With that said, our panel of experts and speakers will break down what does this mean for young people in South Africa and why the impact of youth drinking in our community should be taken more seriously, but we should also keep our schools alcohol-free. With that said, I'd like to introduce Jane Bowman, who, as I said, is a parliamentary researcher on behalf of Ecoeducation, who's going to break down and explain to us exactly what the bill is and what are the educational aspects of this bill and what are its implications. Jane, thank you so much for joining us, and we're looking forward to hearing your thoughts.
Thank you so much for having me. I, of course, would just like to say thank you to SAAPA and the Mail and Guardian for inviting Ecoeducation to be part of this webinar. This is obviously an issue of great importance to communities across the country, and so also thank you everyone who's taking time to participate. A little background on Ecoeducation. We are a membership-based mass democratic movement. Our membership is made up of learners, post-school youth, parents, and community members who are focusing on the right to basic education. We are here today to discuss the Basic Education Amendment Bill, or the Bella Bill, as I'll refer to it throughout this chat. Specifically, a provision in the bill about the sale of alcohol in schools. As a starting point, it's helpful to understand what exactly the Bella Bill is and why it is such an important piece of legislation. The Bella Bill is an act that is written by the Department of Basic Education on proposed changes to school law. This Bella Bill that we are talking about today looks at specific changes to the South African Schools Act and the Employment of Educators Act. The Bella Bill is an important piece of legislation as it will result in major changes to the laws that govern schooling and will set the legal framework for education for the next 10 or even 20 years. This is because a Bella Bill doesn't come out very often and is usually something that is only done every decade or so. Therefore, it's crucial that we, as members of the public, civil society organization, parents and community members, pay close attention to what changes the Bella Bill is proposing for our school laws. I say proposing, as in these changes haven't already been decided, because the Department of Basic Education has put forward their final version of the amendment bill to Parliament. However, Parliament must still engage with this bill, and once Parliament is happy with it, then the bill will be passed and will become law. Part of Parliament's process in looking and analysing the Bella Bill will include hearing public submissions and may also include public hearings across the country. Ecoeducation has been monitoring the Bella Bill very, very closely. And while we are making, as an organisation, input on a host of issues, I'm here today to talk about the fact that the Department of Basic Education has put forward to Parliament an amendment allowing for the sale of alcohol on school premises. The issue of allowing for the sale of alcohol at schools is one of these issues that will create a lasting detrimental change to schools and will impact learner safety and disrupt the school space as a space that is solely aimed at protecting and nourishing children. We have an important opportunity here while the bill is still being considered and changes can still be made to mobilize around the big issues. And that is exactly what we are doing here today. The proposed amendment that we are talking about today is to the South African Schools Act. If passed by Parliament, it will allow for the sale of alcohol on school premises and off school premises under certain circumstances. The amendment will essentially, to go into a little bit more detail, allow school governing bodies to have possession of alcohol and allow for the consumption and sale of liquor during school activities. This can be both on school premises and off school premises, as long as it doesn't happen during school hours. Even though the intention is for this to be, the sale and consumption of alcohol is for it to be regulated, we are deeply concerned that this proposal will harm learners. As an organization working and mobilizing in schools, Ecoeducation and its members have seen the large gap between the policy and implementation in South African schools, and we are concerned that proper monitoring of this provision will not take place. If one simply looks at how alcohol is discussed by law enforcement, children welfare organizations, and civil society organizations, it's clear that alcohol presents a real danger to the safety of children. For example, in public information pamphlets, SAPS uses statements such as, drinking alcohol may make you behave differently or become violent. Another quote is, many people may become involved in crime when they drink. The speakers that go after me will go into detail about how and why alcohol abuse is rampant around the country and how it spares no community and is damaging our children. As an organization, Ecoeducation does not ourselves follow the statistics regarding alcohol-related crimes or alcohol abuse closely on a day-to-day basis. However, as a movement, we have members who live in communities that struggle with the effects of alcohol abuse. They have told us that they feel it will be very difficult to ensure their safety at school functions where alcohol is consumed. And that is unlikely that schools will be able to monitor whether learners have access to alcoholic functions. Therefore, our concern is kind of on two main areas. That learners who attend functions will be allowed under this amendment, that learners under this amendment will be potentially put at risk in terms of their safety and their well-being. We are also concerned that schools will now be another environment in society where learners may be able to engage in underage drinking, which is also detrimental to their health and their education. Schools located in poor and disadvantaged areas are already at particular risk due to the socioeconomic conditions in those communities to the effects of alcohol abuse. Research has also linked alcohol in communities to crime and particularly school violence. EE is not only concerned that the selling of alcohol in school settings is dangerous, but that the wording of the amendment itself is broad and vague. There's not enough clear guidelines in this amendment on what functions will qualify for the sale and consumption of alcohol and which criteria will be used to approve these functions. There is also no mention of public input in different communities, whether specific communities, parents and learners want alcohol at a particular function or to be sold through a particular school. So what are we calling for? Ecoeducation is making a submission to Parliament that our partner, along with our partner organization, Ecoeducation, that we feel strongly that alcohol should not be permitted at schools under any context. This is because, as I've said, it is very hard to monitor if it is properly implemented at schools. And even if it is properly implemented, having it at schools will mean that schools is a space during certain times, not school hours, but during certain times where children may encounter adults who are abusing alcohol. However, if government will not consider taking this provision out, then we are asking that they make the process and criteria for selling alcohol at school functions much, much stricter to try and prevent as much harm and damage as possible. It is hard to understand how the government, the same government who warns of protecting children from being in the presence of drinking and alcohol consumption, could also find that selling alcohol in schools would not impact learners' safety and physical and emotional well-being. The Constitution requires our education departments and government as a whole to make sure that the interests of children are top priority when making decisions that affect them. The decision on whether to allow the use and sale of alcohol on school premises is precisely such a decision, and it is clear that the harm that can be caused by this amendment to children will far outweigh any benefit that the government says it will bring. Thank you very much, and I look forward to a productive conversation.
Thank you so much for those insightful comments, Jane, and in contextualizing what this actually means for schools and for children who are at the heart of who Bella the Bella Act would affect the most. And considering where we are, just in January of this year, we saw the World Health Organization introduce the Alcohol Action Plan for 2022 until 2030, which is to guide the global action to reduce alcohol-related harm. And SAAPA South Africa, as well as other coalitions from other parts of the world, endorse this policy and believe that it is imperative for the South African government to take it under consideration and implement it. At the core of this is to ensure that evidence-based information and studies research is used to inform policies in South Africa, and not at the behest of lobbying that could happen from industry. And it is for this reason that it is important for us to reflect on what the evidence says. And already for years, SAAPA South Africa and its partnering organizations, such as the Soul City Institute for Social Justice, and other bodies such as the South African Medical Research Council and other research bodies across South Africa, have done research to look at alcohol-related harm in this world. And despite the fact that such a low percentage of African countries consume alcohol, about a third of the population on the continent, we as a continent have a very high rates of alcohol consumption, which are fueled by a myriad of issues, including the ways in which alcohol is advertised and the ways in which societal culture encourages binge drinking or excessive drinking. So with this context that we have these problems in South Africa, and we also have problems that are unique in communities where there are children who are susceptible to being harmed when there's alcohol consumption that gets out of control. I now invite our second speaker today, who's Professor Neo Morojele, who I mistakenly attributed the wrong place of employment and position. She's actually the professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Johannesburg. And Professor Neo is going to explain to us exactly what is the evidence saying, how are young people particularly affected by alcohol, and what risk does this pose into their well-being and their future? Prof. Nero? I think you're still muted, Prof. Prof, we are not able to hear you. Could you just unmute yourself before you start your wonderful presentation?
Are you able to hear me now?
That's perfect. Thank you so much.
Excellent. And you can see my screen. You can see my slides.
Yes,
wonderful.
We can.
Thank you. So I've prepared some slides for today. And so I'd like to just also thank the Mail and Guardian and SAAPA for having invited me to present today. I hope my presentation will be useful. So I'm going to be talking on this topic, should alcohol be in schools? And I'm going to talk particularly about research on alcohol that we've conducted in South Africa collectively. I hope that the discussion will help to give us more context as far as alcohol consumption is concerned among young people and among South Africans in general. So just by way of context, we know that among adults, we have amongst the heaviest drinkers in the world. We have the highest average per capita consumption levels among drinkers in the continent. Alcohol is the fifth leading risk factor for death and disabilities, and the majority of alcohol consumed in heavy drinking situations. So in other words, what that means in terms of the last statement is that most of the drinking we do is binge drinking. And that applies not only to adults, but also to young people. This slide here just shows that, in fact, in South Africa, data suggests that the overall percentage of alcohol consumed in heavy drinking occasions is extremely high. 93% of all the alcohol we drink is consumed in that way. So that just gives you a little bit of context of how we drink, which is problematic. So Given that we're focused on young people in particular, I'm going to give you some information about the extent of drinking. So this slide here just shows information from the Demographic and Health Survey. We know that most young people in schools are adolescents, but we know also that there are some young adults in schools as well. So from the Demographic and Health Survey, we know it's a national representative survey. From this slide, you see that about over 50% of young people drink alcohol. So that's what you can see on the left-hand side of the green bars. They represent males, and then the right-hand bars represent females. About 29.3% will have consumed alcohol in their lives. The rates of binge drinking are also very high. So if we just look across to the bars on the second right, in terms of binge drinking, so we have rates of 20% and 5.1% among males and females in the past month. Binge drinking refers to consuming at least 5 drinks on one occasion when one drinks, and it usually gives rise to intoxication, alcohol problems for young people. So of course, it's of concern that young people are drinking in that manner. Firstly, drinking, we know, is associated with mortality. Much of the, this slide here shows work from Dr. Lian Ramsumar, and which I co-authored. And it just shows how she's compared basically the alcohol relatedness of early mortality among adolescents. And what we see in the slide, this is 2002 data and 2008 data, was that, for example, homicides, about 50% of deaths due to homicide are alcohol related, 1 in 2. If we look down, we see suicides, transport-related deaths, etc. So the second for suicide, it's about just under 20%. We see transport-related deaths, about a third in 2002, going up to 40%, etc. So if we look at these slides and we consider what it means, these figures basically, had those young people not been drinking, it's very likely that they wouldn't have succumb to the alcohol-related non-natural deaths. Alcohol, of course, is also associated with numerous acute adverse harms, and these are particularly relevant to young people, given the manner in which they drink. So interpersonal violence, gender-based violence, traffic-related injuries that I've just mentioned, sexual risk behavior, and physical and sexual abuse are among some of the key adverse harms. For example, so I'll give just a few examples just to highlight some of the data we have here in South Africa. A survey we conducted in the Western Cape in 2011 among grade 8, 9, and 10 learners, including a sample of 20,000 learners, showed high rates of violence, perpetration, and victimization. So we know that alcohol consumption is associated with perpetration of violence and victimization. This next slide shows
I've reconnected again, but just
the association between alcohol use and various violence experiences in the past month reported by the young people. And we see that in terms of all the violence experiences indicated, the red bars indicate people who had never consumed alcohol in the last 12 months, the 12 months before the survey. The blue ones, those who had in the past 12 months. And for all the different types of experiences, we see that those who had consumed alcohol were more likely to have experienced or engaged in that behavior. Some of the differences might not look so great, the percentage differences, but if you consider the actual numbers involved, then those differences are in fact quite huge. So we see bullying, so both being a victim and also perpetrating different types of violence are associated with alcohol consumption. In terms of sexual risk behavior, we know the same. So this slide just shows in another study in Durban and Cape Town, which we conducted, we see that, again, for the adolescents who started to drink, they're much higher rates of having initiated sex, but also of having engaged in risky sexual behavior, having had an STI, and having had a pregnancy So those are just some of the, that's just a brief snapshot of some of the information we have available, and there's a lot more. So I think there's no question about the fact that alcohol is associated with many psychosocial harms and health harms. So what are some of the key so-called risk and protective factors? What's underlying? Why is it that adolescents engage in substance use and alcohol in particular? So we know it's a multiplicity of factors, and on this slide I've indicated the different groups or categories of factors. For today's purposes, we are interested in the school and academic environment, and so if we have a look at the slide, we see some of the key factors which are significant, which are important, which we've written about before. They are permissive drinking norms in school environments. The more permissive the drinking norms, the more likely one is to find adolescents drinking and alcohol-related harms. The availability of alcohol in school premise proximity. Again, the more available, we know that, the more young people are likely to drink. And finally, low academic aspirations and suboptimal performance in school. We know that alcohol consumption has implications for young people's performance in school and academic aspirations as well. The other factors we're well aware of include societal factors. We know marketing of alcohol is significant. We also know that various individual factors are also important. And then in terms of community, access to alcohol is always important. Access, in fact, in whatever environment, be it at home, school, community, are always significant. Familial environments are also important, and also one's peers, friends are also important. However, the focus being on schools is important, and that's why I've really highlighted school-related risk and protective factors. So if we want to prevent, it's important to be looking at the community, school, family, peer, individual environment, and focusing again on schools. We need to be addressing those risk factors. In other words, the availability of alcohol. The higher the availability, the more the likely one would see alcohol consumption, and therefore to prevent alcohol consumption, one would, it would follow not provide alcohol on school premises. One would also focus on the norms regarding drinking in school premises, given the association between those factors and alcohol consumption. This slide here is a slide which has really, the purpose of this slide is just to indicate some of the key areas in which interventions can be effective. So in order to address adolescent alcohol and other substance use, it's important to focus on, again, the risk factors mentioned, but not all interventions are effective. If we look at the school again, and we see some of the important factors which, interventions which are important when one wants to look at schools and reduce alcohol among young people. And we see that personal and social skills, classroom management, school policies and culture are important, early childhood education, policies to keep children in school, and prevention education based on personal and social skills or social influences is important. For our purposes today, what is particularly important is the school policies and the school culture, and particularly those relating to alcohol availability for young people. Other interventions are not so effective, which are commonly implemented. And here we have shown the types of interventions that are not so effective. In terms of policy interventions, we know that interventions that focus in particular on access to alcohol, availability of alcohol, making alcohol difficult for young people to access, policies that involve restricting or banning advertising, marketing, or anything that promotes alcohol in any way, be it promoting alcohol by way of the norms within the context in which young people are located, are most important in terms of reducing alcohol consumption. So in terms of the question of whether alcohol should be in schools, with this very brief presentation, it's clear that alcohol consumption is associated with many problems, we know that. So having alcohol in schools, one could argue, is likely to be associated with the key risk factors for alcohol consumption. If we are to have alcohol in schools, firstly, it will increase the availability, perceived availability. Those are key risk factors. It will increase the permissive drinking norms. So we'll face challenges, won't we, if we have alcohol in schools? Because if the challenges if alcohol is in schools would be, for example, having to ensure learners do not get access to alcohol via the schools, would have to ensure this availability does not lead to permissive drinking norms at the school. Those are really key challenges, in fact, concerns that one would have given the nature of the research. We would argue that having alcohol in schools would be associated with an increased risk of alcohol consumption and alcohol-related harms at the end of the day. So the question is really, are the benefits, and we'll hear what they are at some point, are those benefits really worth those risks to learners of having alcohol in schools? So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. Morojele, for that very insightful presentation, again, showing the level of evidence that is there to say that this is quite harmful to young people and children in particular, who are already victims of harmful use in indirect ways, because they're vulnerable to physical or psychological abuse when the adults around them or the community around them excessively drinks. There's lack of care for children and lack of adequate education, which are all harmful to the well-being of children. It decreases their chances of even completing school when they're in environments where their basic needs are not met. And in a country, like I said earlier on, where we already have so many societal and socioeconomic issues that are acting in direct opposition to ensuring that the wellness, the health, and the future of children is paramount and is the number one priority in terms of communities, but also through public policy. And as Prof. Morojele said, that, you know, the perceived availability of alcohol will be a contributing factor. And even though right now there are legislation in provinces such as Gauteng, where alcohol liquor licenses are not allowed 500 meters away from an educational institution, we already see that those policies or that legislation is already being defied. What more when there's alcohol directly in schools? What will happen in those cases? And what really are the ways in which young people and children in particular are affected by alcohol, and why it's important for us to keep it out of schools through exercising our participation rights as parents, as community members, as South Africans, in ensuring the protection of children's rights in the future. And to tell us more about children's rights and the importance, or rather the ways in which children and young people are impacted and affected by alcohol, is Shaheda Omar, who is the clinical director of the Teddy Bear Foundation and Clinic, where abused children are taken care of. Shaheda, would you please share some more insights on the ways in which policies such as the amendment to the Bella Bill would cause harm to children and young people?
Good afternoon to everybody, and thank you to the Mail and Guardian and SAAPA. And just to add that we at the Teddy Bear Foundation are very passionate about the safety and protection of children. And we are often presented with children who are either victims or maltreated as a result of alcohol consumption, alcohol misuse at home, in public settings, and children who then go on to become victimizers or suffer in other forms or manifestations. So I'm so pleased that Professor Neo went ahead of me. She covered a lot of the things that I would have liked to share. So I'm going to summarize some of the key points that we have seen and experienced on the ground. What we are actually seeing is that alcohol use often begins in the teens and increases as children grow older. And in 2019, a study was done where they found that 2 out of 100 children between the ages of 12 to 13 reported drinking during the past month. And that is of grave concern, because a child of 12 years and a child of 13 are still developing. The frontal cortex and even the whole development of the brain continues until the age of 25. So this is a cause for concern. And that what we also found that fewer than 1 in 100 children engaged in binge drinking. And of concern is that alcohol initiation age has reduced significantly. About 12% of youth report drinking by the age of 13. So this seems to be the general age cohort, or the risk of age cohort. And looking at alcohol in teenagers, again, if we look at clinical evidence and studies that have indicated the most influential role models for children are their parents, caretakers, caregivers, significant others like educators and other icon figures, reference groups that they may have and that they look up to and look out for in terms of support. What we need to understand is, yes, we cannot prevent young children from experimenting with alcohol, but we can encourage sensible habits by role modeling, not by speaking to drink responsibly. What we often see on TV, the ads about drinking responsibly, I think that is of grave concern. The safest level of alcohol drinking for children is not drinking. And I think that's the message and constant and consistent message that needs to go out. We need to be aware of the laws about allowing and serving alcohol at school. So it's about the role model. Children look up to educators, to people within the school environment. And if we teach children about alcohol at an early age, the harms and ill effects of alcohol abuse will certainly not be a problem to be concerned about. We need to educate children about the links between alcohol use and risky behavior, and how alcohol impacts the ability to make sound decisions. I want to speak to the fact we talk about risky behavior, and Prof. Neo spoke, I think, quite thoroughly about the risks that children are presented with alcohol. And what we've seen, the grave concern that we are all faced with, and over this Child Protection Week, the Department of Social Development spoke about the teen pregnancies, the high incidence of teen pregnancies. And at the Teddy Bear Foundation, we are currently working with a number of groups facilitated on unwanted pregnancies. And it was interesting where we had both girls and boys in school settings where they alluded to the fact that they were under the influence of alcohol and did not consider or make a sound decision because they were not in a position to, and the lack of impulse control, and as a result, the unwanted teen pregnancy. And we need to understand that these are children between the ages of 12 and 14, children birthing other children, children who were under the influence of alcohol, who actually also had access to taverns and shebeens close by. But also the other concerning factor is that they have access. There's no restriction they go and purchase the alcohol. There's no restriction, there's no regulation to protect children. So I think we need to, realize that alcohol use is highly prevalent among high school learners, and alcohol dependence is becoming a threat at a very early age for children. And children as young as 10 years are referred for intervention. We've even seen a pregnant child of 10 years. So I think we cannot take this for granted or treat it lightly. Alcohol and its health risks for young people. Children are at a greater risk of alcohol-related harm. Children, as Prof alluded to, the maltreatment of children. We see a lot of children who are victims of physical abuse, sexual abuse, and even neglect, where parents are spending, or caretakers are spending their money on alcohol and not being able to provide for the basic needs of a child, where children are not even getting a slice of bread or food at home, and they are exposed to violence, the interpersonal violence. But we also need to look at the physiological damage that alcohol could certainly result in, because as the brain develops, drinking alcohol as a teenager can greatly increase the risk of damage to the developing brain. Alcohol releases neurotoxins, and it can also lead to problems with alcohol later in life, where children are more likely to engage in risky behaviors, unsafe sexual practices, as we've mentioned before, the lack of use of condoms or contraceptives, but this could have a ripple effect in terms of teen pregnancies, the HIV, the STIs, and, again, the harmful effects of the use of alcohol on children. I think we also need to, I'm also repeating what Prof said, but I think it's important looking at the protective factors. The family is is pivotal to protection of children. The positive role models, where we need to understand that how do children learn best by? Children learn by observational theory. They learn by what they see, and they acquire these behaviors from their role models. So again, if we look at safe neighborhoods, and when we speak about safe neighborhoods, it's about the access to the alcohol outlets where children are sold alcohol, and to protect children from that kind of opportunity. So another protective factor, and I think this is where schools are so key and so vital in ensuring the safety and protection of children. And of course, our children attending school are the future generation, the future leaders. So no alcohol should be allowed on school premises, regardless of whether it's for a celebration, for an event, for an activity. But the focus should be on awareness raising, and educators are the key role models in the school environment, where if educators are allowed to have access to alcohol at special events at school, this still normalizes, it socializes children into thinking that's an educator, that's an adult, and adults are responsible beings and people. And of course, children are likely to identify with these role models and, of course, mimic what they see around them. So it's about that socializing and ensuring that there is no tolerance for alcohol, zero alcohol, whether it's at a fete, a valedictory service, a school concert, sports days. And I think that's what we need to understand, because the subliminal message that is conveyed is that without alcohol, there's no fun. Because when we've engaged with children, the responses are that, they see this on television, they see it on billboards, they see the adverts, and the grandiosity and the eroticization, it's all exaggerated. It's like they are missing out big time if they do not engage or partake in this kind of activity. So if we look at the risk factors, it's glaring. The advertising industry, which is very robust and very influential on the young, innocent children. It is, the message that is conveyed is it is sexy to drink. And I think this is demonstrated by the people, part of that advert where they are, you know, beautiful and they look like they're really having a lot of fun, and it's almost as if they've arrived. If they enjoy it in their drink, they've arrived, they are successful. And that's the kind of messaging that is impacting on the brain of children. And it also, I think, clearly indicates that alcohol is the panacea for all ills. After hard day's work, you know, you open a bottle of wine, or you need to reach out for your alcohol. If you're having any kind of festivity, you cannot have it without alcohol. Whether it's a death, for grieving purposes, people resort to alcohol. So I think this kind of drinking and allowing any kind of alcohol at school events normalizes the link between drinking and social occasions. And this certainly would impact on the children's thoughts and belief systems, and of course, their behavior, which is always not acceptable and I think of concern. So I want to also just focus on underage drinking. And why is it dangerous? Because, as Prof has also spoken to, that it would increase school-related problems, performance, concentration, increased absenteeism, and also the lack of impulse control. We would find that some of the children would display aggressive tendencies, physical problems, and the issue that we are all currently facing, where we've seen 23,000 cases of unwanted pregnancies, the teen pregnancies, where children are certainly affected by this. And some of them have been under the influence of alcohol. We cannot actually give an accurate estimation, but just from the 3 groups that we worked with thus far, a number of those young girls and boys indicated the influence of alcohol. And I think we need to also look at that underage drinking certainly has a relationship and is associated with adult drinking. Links between alcohol use and child maltreatment, that is something we see very often. We are an organization that works with victims of child abuse, and we are seeing a lot of children who are victims of physical abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, and sexual abuse. And I think I'll just speak quickly to case studies now, where we saw a child that came in with multiple fractures. He was at the hospital, and on further exploration, the child explained that his father came home drunk and was beating his mother, and he tried to stop him, and he took a steel tube, and of course he was beaten till he passed out. So just looking at the relation, the maltreatment of children, then working with an affluent girls' school, what we found is that educators gave alcohol to girls, and of course, under the influence of alcohol, sexually abused them, and there were a number of girls. And there are many other cases, the Jewel's High case, where we saw that the impact was devastating, and the young girl eventually committed suicide. And it's all about access to alcohol and alcohol indulgence, which certainly impacts on children. So in conclusion, I just want to say that we recognize that schools are under pressure to raise funds, and that the sale of alcohol at events are a money spinner. We need to be aware that the presence of alcohol normalizes the consumption to children. We need to put healthy children first before money. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shaheda, for also making those very important points around the link between child safety, wellness, health, and the availability of alcohol. It's so clear now through all the speakers that we've had so far that the wild availability of alcohol to particularly young people is detriment to their own health, and that when young people and children are heavily exposed to whether it's advertising, marketing, and as well as the availability of alcohol, that they become more susceptible to risky behavior or a risky way of living. And when we even think around, what happens in South Africa and the myriad of issues that affect us as a country, where within the country there are structural drivers such as poverty, unemployment, gender inequality, and as well as we know gender-based violence, which is perpetuated with the availability of alcohol, and particularly around children. But as well as what Prof. Morojele as well as Shaheda talked about when they talked about the risks that are connected or that are related to this availability, and what this would mean for South Africa. And with that, we've heard the educational aspect of the Bella Bill and how it would impact the passing of this clause of availability of alcohol, or to be able to sell alcohol on school premises, would do from Jane from Ecoeducation, and then Prof. Morojele as well really showed us the evidence-based work that has been done within South Africa to contextualize and to show what are the dangers of going through with the Bella Bill in its current form, as well as Shaheda, who's from the Teddy Bear Foundation, really contextualizing as well as the cycle of abuse that could continue, where children who are exposed to excessive alcohol users, whether it's parents or other adults around them, are more susceptible to being abused or mistreated or neglected. And this can create a cycle of abuse that we as a country are already struggling with our gender-based violence statistics, and really protecting children, particularly girls and young women, from abuse, as well as in the context of South Africa, where 7.9 million South Africans are living with HIV. We know this from research as well, that young girls particularly, but young people in general, are more at risk of HIV and STI infections, as well as the fact that they make up a big majority of the new HIV infections. This is just a cocktail of disaster waiting to really show, or where we would see the impacts within society, other societal problems as mentioned, but really to locate this and contextualize this within the community, and for us to really understand, what does this look like on the ground when we're going around townships, rural areas, suburbs around South Africa? What does this look like on the ground? And one person who has a lot of experience with this is Reverend Tsepo Matubatuba, who's really going to explain to us the community experiences and the first-hand account of what happens when young people are put in positions that I've mentioned and that all our other speakers have really spoken about. And Rev, I would like to really welcome you to share about things that you've seen in the communities that you work in, and the ways in which alcohol and the availability of alcohol, particularly to young people, impacts on the ways that they are able to live and flourish, or actually impairs their ability to even flourish within their communities. Reverend?
Thank you, Pontsho. You have really sort of summed up what I was going to say, and especially coming to the health consequences that are caused by alcohol in societies. I just want to say alcohol is one of the drivers of a number of social ills that affect our communities adversely, resulting in the devastating effects that we see in our communities. It is also the most harm to society in terms of health, rate of traumas resulting from motor vehicle accidents, and also as a result of the violence, that leads people to fighting, stabbing, shooting, and all the things that we know happen when people have had a drink. I think this was clearly demonstrated, during the hard lockdowns of COVID-19, when coronavirus lockdown actually didn't allow the sale of liquor. How much, accidents were avoided, how much stabbings, shootings, and violent acts were reduced, and allowing the hospitals to be able to accommodate the people, that were affected by the coronavirus. We know during the very hard lockdowns, that hospitals were able to accept people because they were not competing with the traumas that happened because of the excessive availability of alcohol in our societies. Myself living in the areas like Yeovil, Perea, and whatever, veterans which are around the inner city of Johannesburg, one could really experience, how sober it was during those times, because, people were not having free availability of alcohol. When coming to health issues, we know that HIV and AIDS is driven mostly by the excessive use of alcohol. It is one of the main drivers of infections. For a long time, we know that we have been having people being infected because of the risky behaviors they engage in when they have had a drink. So we also know that even for young children, they start engaging in those risky behaviors because of drinking and having alcohol free for them to drink. And I don't know, this culture of actually thinking that to celebrate success, one should use alcohol. We have seen the infections that also spiked during the coronavirus pandemic, when children went all the way to areas like Palito in Devon to go and celebrate finishing their matric exams and all that. And we heard how many people were infected in one night at such occasions. So I think we need to have really a better sort of education that alcohol is not really the best way of celebrating success, because at the end of the day, it brings misery. Because I don't think it was nice for the parents and the families of those children who had gone to those places to go and enjoy themselves. Now, when they were coming infected and now causing panic of death because of the false, entertainment they thought they were going to. Working in communities, we find a lot of orphaned and vulnerable children being as a result of parents, who have died as a result of alcohol abuse, or maybe if they are people that have been infected with HIV, and now you find that those risky behaviors or lifestyles they live accelerate their status of HIV into AIDS, and they die prematurely, leaving children to be either child-headed or maybe people that have got to be adopted or sent to institutions, which we know that are not also good ways of bringing up children. So I don't know where this illusion that if schools are given licenses to sell alcohol, they are going to be doing the best fundraising, because we know alcohol is a drug alcohol is a killer, which we need schools to educate children that they need to avoid it. Now, if we are now allowing that schools use this, something they claim not to be good for our health, good for societal norms, and good for safety in general, and we say we want to raise money that is going to run these schools, is that not a contradiction in terms? Coming from rural areas, I sometimes observe some of our customs, that we do there. We have got this practice of initiation into manhood. And when the boys come back from the mountains, you will find that there's such availability of alcohol. And when we actually try and tell these young men to behave, and we give them alcohol, saying, you are a man now, windowed, but we are actually trying to teach them that alcohol is not right. So I see this also in that context, that we are saying alcohol is not good for our health, alcohol is not good for our society, alcohol is not good for sanity. But now, if we allow the schools to actually now be the ones that say, yes, alcohol is not good, but we can use it in order to fundraise for the schools that you attend. So who is expected to buy this alcohol if we are saying it is not good? Is it not also these parents of these children? And what are they going to say to the children when they say alcohol is not good, when alcohol is sold at the schools where they learn? I really find it as a very controversial, thing that our government wants to do. Yes, we know that there are families that say we have brought up these children because we were able to sell alcohol and be able to get money to finance their education. But at the end of the day, how much harm is it doing to other children? Because I'm sure when children come and buy from these taverns, shebins and whatever, we take that money, not actually thinking that it is actually destroying those children. Yes, I know that schools need money, but I don't think alcohol is the way to say we can fundraise with it. I have seen some of the private schools, that have got the tradition of having Easter sports and whatever. And you find that they will call SAB to come and have troughs and troughs of beers and whatever sold in their premises. I don't know whether they do get licenses for that, but I find it as really contradictory that we are teaching these young people to say alcohol is dangerous and should be avoided by all costs, but we allow it, when we want to make money. I was speaking to some ladies at our church, actually asking them to sign this petition to oppose this Bella bill. And one lady was, who's actually also a very community-oriented person. She is working in the health space. She was saying, why are they not applying for licenses to sell at least food, and especially healthy things like vegetables and fruits that we teach children and we teach our learners that they are healthy and they are to be consumed, more than any other foodstuffs. So I want to say, having witnessed the I think very, very sad state of children growing up without parents because they have, abused alcohol and shortened their lives. I feel very much touched when I hear that schools want to use the very same thing that destroys society. And it is known the alcohol harm that we are experiencing. And they want to use it in those schools where they are teaching that it is not good for their consumption. I think I'll end it there.
Thank you so much, Reverend Tsepo, for those insightful on-the-ground experiences that you've had, And as I said in the beginning, that we are encouraging a lot of comments in the section, in the comment and Q&A section, and we've had very vibrant participants, including Busisiwe Ngwenya, who is asking if there's been any engagement between the Department of Education and the Department of Trade and Industry around custodians and what their views on the custodians of liquor laws are. And we also have other questions, one from Andile Magwaza, which I think I'm just going to pose to whoever can answer it on the panel around currently, when applying for a liquor license, is there any clause that blocks anyone who operates on an address that is in and around schools when they try to apply for a license? And I think we answered that earlier on, but if Prof. Morojele thinks she can answer this, you can also answer it. And Julia Todd also asked, what are the arguments that have been proposed for having alcohol in schools, and is it all about fundraising activities? While my esteemed panel prepares themselves to answer those questions, I'll read some of the comments also around, we have Carol talking about how drunk driving is a really big issue in South Africa, and then it causes a lot of deaths. Drunk driving and even drunk walking are the causes of death amongst young people between 15 and 29 years old across South Africa. This is something that has been a problem in South Africa, and remembering that this also leaves many people slightly or severely injured or paralyzed because of the accidents or the crashes that happen as a result of drunk driving, which is a big problem. And, some of the discussions also that are happening here around modeling behavior that really talks to young people thinking about behaving better. And this also talks to this permissive environment of creating an environment where it is okay to drink, and it is considered, it's very normalized to binge drink. And just thinking around South Africa's drinking, in 2016, the World Health Organization estimated that South Africans consume about 9 liters of pure alcohol each day, each. And when we're looking at that, we're looking at about 3 liters more per person as compared to other African countries. And this just shows the heavy use of alcohol that we have in our country in general, and how this, as my esteemed panel has talked about, could really influence young people. And so I'd like to call upon my panel to answer those few questions that I brought ahead, which were around the liquor licenses and what happens around giving liquor license out, and whether or not there are restrictions. As far as that question, as said earlier, it's around Gauteng, where there is legislation that prohibits the sale of alcohol within a 500-meter radius of school or an educational facility. However, already that law, as SAAPA SA has seen, is not even being abided by in this current state. And so, Prof. Neo, I don't know if you have more insights regarding the liquor license, but also around the oppositional motivation behind alcohol availability and this fundraising, whether this fundraising question is the only ways in which the Bella Bell is justifying the sales of alcohol on campuses. And with that, I'd like to remind our audiences that you have a chance to really, some of the comments here which are in opposition and really support the health of children, to input on the Bella Bell, which closes for submissions next week on the 15th of June. So you can help stop this bill by writing to your SGB and your local schools, telling them that you really do not like or you object to this on the basis of the safety of children, preventing harm, as well as ensuring that their educational environment is conducive. You can write to your provincial Department of Education. You can write directly to Minister Angie Motshekga, who's the Minister of Basic Education as well, and ask her to withdraw this clause or this proposal within the Bella Bill, as well as demanding government funds for schools so that schools don't feel desperate and that the need to raise funds should only come from the sales of alcohol, as Shaheda had said before. And so with regards to understanding this, I'd like to call my panel up to just really think around some of the issues that our audiences have brought forward, and I'm seeing some responses from the Executive Director of SAAPA, Maurice Smith, is already in the comment section, really talking about how many people asking how you could really support SAAPA SA's initiatives through their website and on social media. Their website is www.saapa.africa, and this is where you can get more information, as well as some of the advocacy demands that SAAPA over the years has really advocated for. There's also a petition that is up on amandla.mobi, which Maurice also provided the link to, which really is an online petition saying you're standing with SAAPA, the whole coalition, as well as a parent, a citizen of South Africa, that you want to stop the bill in its current form, and also looking at ensuring the safety of children with regards to the sales of alcohol on children's on school premises for the sake of fundraising. And this shows kind of the systematic also failures that exist within a public health or even a public education system, where schools have to resort to these means in order to raise funds, much needed funds for the running of schools and the improvement of schools outside of the support that they get from the Department of Basic Education, donations from the SGB, or nonprofit organizations and business in their communities, which is sometimes the only way in which schools are able to raise funds. And so with that, I also think there's another question around Ecoeducation, whether Ecoeducation will be submitting whether Ecoeducation, Jane, will be submitting their stance to Parliament around the Bella Act in Bella Bill around alcohol, and what are ways in which Ecoeducation can be supported. Jane?
Hi, thank you so much. Yes, sorry about that. Thanks. So Ecoeducation is going to be making a submission to Parliament. We will be making a submission along with the Ecoeducation Law Centre, and we will be making it on a variety of different issues. But one of those issues will be the alcohol issue. It's an issue that, we think is one of the central issues of the bill. So we will be making a submission on that. I think in terms of supporting our work, specifically regarding the alcohol, I think that the potential introduction of the alcohol at schools, I think that, a lot of organizations are submitting a very comprehensive document that's very detailed, but some public submissions, which are equally as important, are just a short letter written by a parent, a learner, it could be a group, a community, a school, to sort of state the opposition to allowing for the sale of alcohol in schools regarding the Baylor Bill. So, as you heard, the submission is due on the 15th. And if anybody has the time to simply write a letter, doesn't have to be long, can even be in bullet points, and then to submit the letter as a submission. And I think the more that the Basic Education Committee in Parliament understands the opposition to this issue, then perhaps the more traction it will get. So I think that is really, moving forward from our perspective, one of the strongest things that can be done. But yes, we will be making a submission on this and on other issues. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that, Jane. And I would like to repeat that you are really encouraged to send, whether it's to your education, provincial education department, the SGB at your school, or directly writing to the minister, signing the petition that is in the chat as well. And for Prof. Morojele, I have a question for you, which is around what are the policy disjunctures that exist within government's policies that mean to progress and address the harm that alcohol has in society? Are there ways in which there are just contradictions within our legislature and policies at the moment that really come against the protection of young people when it comes to alcohol? You're muted, Prof. Sorry about that.
Am I unmuted now? Thank you very much for the question. So there are lots of questions which we've been asked, actually, and I was rather keen to, come in on some of them. So we did speak about the issue of liquor licenses around schools. I think that's been addressed. It is important that children are not exposed to alcohol on school premises or within a certain perimeter of schools. In terms of the other question you asked about policy disjunctures in government, well, clearly we've got a long way to go when it comes to addressing alcohol harms, be it for young people and for society at large. And so given that it seems like the government is not, I believe, taking alcohol seriously at this point with respect to harms to children and to society in general. And I think that the proposal here is just another example of the way in which it seems that the government is not taking the health of individuals, of society seriously. This also then brings me to the point of the justification on the part of the Department of Education for wanting to raise funds by permitting the sale of alcohol on school premises. I think, again, from the presentations that have gone after me, in particular, it seems like young people, it's almost like young people are really being sacrificed because of the interests of raising funds. It's not really clear how the department justifies so strongly, given the strength of evidence on the seriousness of alcohol in our communities, in schools, etc., in society. South Africa being a country with such high levels of alcohol harms, how it can justify the idea of selling alcohol on school premises is really a mystery. How it can strongly justify, and maybe we could I would like to actually have more engagement on that question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Morojele. And again, in the chat, Maurice Smithers, who's the Executive Director, answering a lot of those questions regarding whether the partnership with DSD is happening. And, even though the Children's Act doesn't deal specifically with the issue of alcohol, the Children's Amendment Bill, when it was being discussed during public hearings last year, SAAPA SA, as well as communities, raised the issue of alcohol harm and in and around schools and what risk it poses for learners. And so we're seeing kind of this where even communities, without being prompted by the Alliance or other organizations that are working in this field, parents are already concerned and community leaders are already concerned because of what they're experiencing in their communities. And we see also, here's another question around whether do we know how alcohol affects the school attendance and performance of learners and students and in high schools and in tertiary institution. Justice talking about his own experience there, where he studied at University of Venda, and there was a student bar on campus that really was tempting because it even operated during school holidays. So I'm not sure if Shaheda, you'd be able to answer that, or even Prof. Morojele again, around any studies that have been done to measure whether or not alcohol has a direct impact on the attendance and performance of learners and students.
Thank you, Pontsho. I'm sure Prof will add to what I have to say. I'm speaking from from the level of interaction and engagement in interventions with children. So we have what you call is a diversion program for young sex offenders, and these are children under the age of 18 who have come into conflict with the law. And we've done several studies with the young boys, and from their responses, we have actually found that they have violated or have been sexually aggressive to other victims, girls and boys, and it was often under the influence of alcohol. They used alcohol as a weapon to release their inhibitions, and of course, feeling more powerful and less guilty, have violated. So if you look at the incidence of alcohol and the impact on children's behavior and the cycle of abuse that it perpetuates. So we see a lot of children. A lot of our children that have been victims of incest are children who come from dysfunctional families, and where the fathers who have violated the young girls have also used alcohol or misuse of alcohol on a regular basis. So I would just like to inform people that alcohol has the harmful effects on sexual abuse and abuse of children in general. But I'm sure Prof can speak to the tertiary institutions and how it impacts on students there. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much for that question. So indeed, alcohol does affect school attendance and performance for learners and for students in tertiary institutions. And for tertiary institutions in particular, because of suddenly the freedom that one observes for the first time for some young people, one finds that they are exposed, they have easy access to alcohol. And as a result, one finds young people ending up dropping out of school, not continuing with their education because of this sudden high level of availability of alcohol consumption, and as a result, they might end up not so involved in their academic work anymore. So indeed, there is a lot of strong evidence showing the effects and the association between alcohol consumption and school performance and attendance. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And, I think we've had such a fruitful discussion, even in the comment section.
Can I just make a last comment, Pontsho?
I was about to ask for comments from you, Rev.
I think until we actually bring these debates and awareness to the grassroots, we are going to be fighting losing battle, because mostly these things, go around these media circles and whatever. So I think we need to find a way of really conscientizing the people at the grassroots to say, do you know what is being proposed for your children at your local schools? Because we will be doing academic exercises, objecting, but if we really involve the people that are directly affected, I think that is where our winning. But we need to find ways how we get to the grassroots and make them aware of these things. We are going to be always saying our government is letting us down, but let's make the people there at the grassroots really, I don't know what campaigns we can do to make the communities aware of what is being proposed for their children.
Thank you so much, Reverend Tsepo, for that. I think that was very, very key into really involving communities. And one of the ways in which SAAPA SA is asking for community to be involved is in the objection to the Bella Bill, right? Whether it is through really writing that letter to your provincial education department, to the minister, and to the SGB, and also practicing what we preach. We cannot be sitting here and saying that we do not want children and young people to be alcohol dependent or their futures to be put on hold because of alcohol, or that we stand against underage drinking and then attend events in schools where alcohol is sold. As parents, in capacities as parents, we can object in our local schools, in the schools that our children attend, to say that, no, this is what's happening. These are the harmful ways in which allowing alcohol during a sports event, during a fundraising event, can really harm children, and being part of the solution in these ways. You can join SAAPA's mailing list to be kept in touch with all the developments and the advocacy work that SAAPA SA is doing, as well as the regional work that is happening across the continent. And you can contact them, as Maurice has put in the chat, at www.saapa.africa, and that's the main page where you'll see a lot of communication around that. And on social media, on Twitter, you can find them at SAAPA7. You can also be engaged and involved in the fight for the prevention of harm of children by signing the petition on amandla.mobi that's really calling for the same thing, where this clause is removed, or the promotion or the permission of alcohol to be sold on school premises is objected against. These are the ways in which you can support SAAPA, you can support and be part of bringing the solutions forward in preventing the harm on children. And as I see there, Maurice has ended and saying that on behalf of SAAPA SA, he'd really like to thank the presenters, Shaheda Omar, Jane Borman, Reverend Tsepo Matubatuba, and Professor Neo Morojele, who really shared their insights and expertise in making us understand and unpack this issue, and really located in the greater context of South Africa, and the need for South Africa to have progressive policies that protect children. And on behalf of SAAPA and the Mail and Guardian and the speakers, I think we can now bring the webinar to close. And thank you so much for attending. Through those channels, you can be involved in the fight. And remember that that Parliament closes for us to be able to comment on this next week on the 15th of June. Thank you so much.
Plato said, "Who will guard the guardians?" Who are our guardians? Do they care about us? Are they accountable for their actions, or are they above the law? Who elects these guardians? Us? Them? Someone else? And if they guard us, who will guard them? Who will guard the guardians? The Malin Guardian.